Welcome and good morning to everybody who's joined Sensiba and PBO this morning. We want to take a minute to say thanks for spending the next hour with us. And you have officially entered the webinar for Do You Have the Right Systems in Place for Your Business? So we all presume you're here because that's of interest to you. So we're going to go through quite a few things, and we have an awesome panel that's going to walk through different perspectives. And as PBO, an advisory group, our subject matter experts, we love to bring different players to the table to give a pithy conversation, but also to sort of give different vantage points for consideration as systems speak to a lot of different verticals within business. So just housekeeping rules really quickly. Wanted to let you know that our webinar is being recorded, so you will have this link sent to you afterwards. So if you need to jump early and or like to send it along to someone else, please know you will get a follow-up email that has the link along with everybody's bios, etc. There is a chat feature, so everybody who has joined the panel, or excuse me, not the panel, but as a listener, will have no ability to speak necessarily, but you do have the option from a chat feature to drop any questions that you might have in the chat feature. And we will do a Q&A in the end, so we'll hold all of the questions to the end. And then we will begin to sort of pepper questions as they come up. If we want to pause, thinking they're meaningful at that time, address them at that time. Okay, so let's get to our panelists. My name is Nicole Devine, and I am a consulting chief people officer at PBO Advisory. I have the distinct pleasure of running two of our revenue groups, the Human Capital Division, which is a consulting division, and also our outsourced human resources team. And Justin Hall is also a member of the PBO Advisory Group. Justin actually has more than 10 years of experience in the human resources field. He has an additional 15 years in the Manage with Management experience. So I can speak personally about Justin. He is a subject matter expert on the HRIS implementations. We are system agnostic at PBO, which means we've seen it all for the most part. And he really specializes not just in human resources as a human consultant capital. Geez, that came out. A consulting human resources director. Geez, early morning. But also as a subject matter expertise with the HRIS. So happy to have him here. Thank you, Justin. Tom actually is with Sensiba, who is a great partner for PBO and a new relationship for us. So welcome. We appreciate you joining our panel. Tom actually has more than 30 years delivering accounting support and helping clients evaluate, implement, and optimize cloud-based financial and ERP software investments. So again, a different lens coming to the team for us. He has a diverse background working in public accounting, which you can always appreciate, and across various public and private industries. So a wealth of knowledge there. He does actually specialize in nonprofits, municipal government, healthcare, and retail. So a wealth of experience and subject matter expertise that we appreciate you giving your insight. Now that we have all the intros, let's move to the first. Just a table set for the attendees. This is going to be light on the deck in terms of what you're going to see for information, but the information really is going to be more in a collaborative discussion amongst our panelists. So wanted to start actually with when we talk about the first phase, which is how do you even know that you need to assess your current system? So I'm actually going to start with bullet point number 2, which is identifying key signs that indicate it might be time for a change. So I'm going to kick it to Justin, if you'd like to start. What are some of the things that you're seeing, and what are some of the things that our attendees should begin to look for?
Yeah, so doing what I do, I've seen a lot of different companies and a lot of different systems, but one of the key one of the common factors is the abundance of systems in place. Typically what I mean by that is they might have a payroll system, a learning management system, an applicant tracking system, a communication system, review systems, all these different systems that are in place that are not necessarily talking to each other or integrated into each other. And that's caused for many different reasons, but typically it's the payroll system that is not capable of doing more than just payroll. So that's one of the big indicators that I've seen doing what I do is just an overabundance of systems, which are creating more manual work than they're actually automating, and causing kind of a cost increase, and cost per employee is high on that as well. But other factors are also to growth in your company. You might be going from a 15, 20 person company to a 50 person company. That's a big indicator. There's a lot of compliance laws, rules that go along with that. Systems are there to keep you in place, to help help with those items. And conversely, some companies just have a lack of systems. What I mean by that is they only have payroll and they're doing everything else paper. From reviews to write-ups or whatever it might be. Other items that I've seen out there, the processes are just overly complex and complicated. Many different steps and science reviews, many different people signing off on items, and then probably the last biggest item is compliance, just overall compliance. So recently been sued, having issues with regulations, policies, or HR laws.
Yeah, awesome. And Tom, what about you? What are you seeing? What do you see as flags to even just know, hey, I need to even just look into this?
Well, a lot of the same things that Justin said, but in financial systems, one thing that seems to be recurring in all of the projects that we approach are a lot of spreadsheets. So if your actual reporting and accounting system turns out, when you back up and look at the big picture, turns out that it's Excel, because your existing accounting systems, and that could include expense approvals, all kinds of ancillary systems, are being done using spreadsheets. That's the number one sign in finance. But as Justin's saying, you hit a point of growth, and it's not necessarily number of people in finance, but you might be seeing a spike in the cost of your finance department because you have too many systems, just as Justin said, and you're having to manually replicate the same data across multiple systems. And you might be hitting a different kind of compliance level where you have rounds of funding or outside investors, and you need to step up the internal controls. And an entry-level system that was perfectly fine for getting going and getting your taxes records ready for the first couple of years, when you hit that level, is not going to be able to apply the internal controls, the segregations of duties, and the just the documentation and audit trail that you need for higher level of a test and audit services. So those are some.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And as part of the prep for this webinar, this panel discussed even when we're assessing systems and being flagged on things, sort of the synergies between accounting, finance, and then on the human resources, the people side of the house, even just understanding how the systems impact one another, right? And as they're so interconnected. So as you're evaluating the effectiveness of systems, so now we've sort of been flagged of, hey, either I'm not using my system the way I should be, or I have too many systems, or not enough systems, or, and every business pivots based on need. What are some of the steps that you guys look for in terms of evaluating the effectiveness of an existing, what is the best practice in that? What might be a first step for somebody to look at? I'll send that to Justin, I guess, unless Tom, you were jumping at the bit to get to it.
Go ahead, Justin.
I'll go first. So for me, it's kind of the manual hours or time spent doing tasks associated with HR transactional items. We'll take kind of payroll as an example. I have a client that is processing payroll for 90 employees, taking up to 20 hours to manually process it through a system. When you fully, correctly automate or set up a system, you're looking at, half an hour to hour and a half tops for something of that nature. So for me, when I'm kind of evaluating systems and effectiveness, I'm looking at time spent outside of the system, completing tasks that the system does for you. And a lot of times when systems are not utilized correctly, that's what's happening. You have a system that does something, but kind of like Tom said, you're using 3 or 4 Excel spreadsheets outside of the system to create your payroll or create your deductions or whatever it might be, taking that information and manually inputting it back into the system that does it for you. So that's one of the way I measure effectiveness. And then it's also to just kind of cost of per employee, and what are you kind of spending per employee for systems, and what are you getting out of the systems, and the utilizations of systems. Are you using a system fully to its capabilities? Are you piecemealing it? Are you paying for it but not using it at all? Those are kind of the 3 big areas that you can kind of see where your effectiveness is heading towards. For someone who doesn't do this all the time, it's really just time spent outside of a system. Is how much are you working outside of a system when a system does it for you?
And just to pause on that quickly, and maybe Tom, you can speak to this. So on the people side of the house, we look at that as, is that a system limitation or is that a talent limitation, right? In terms of the training isn't there, for example, on the people side, to where they don't really know how to use the system. And so are you seeing that on the finance side also, where it may not be the system, it might be, and that's part of the assessment, right? Which is sometimes it's a talent issue in terms of we need to upskill and or bring in just some more time and investment in the training side of the house.
Yeah, because when we're talking about systems, we're talking about it in this forum here, like as applications and integrations, but the systems really are the people and the processes as well. So it all needs to wrap together. And when I think about effectiveness, if you're having to go through all of those hoops to get to the end product that the stakeholders need, whether that's reporting or whether that's getting vendors paid, those outputs are what we're really trying to get to. So, I would focus on the end point and what do we need out of our financial system, and then back into what are the steps we need to take to get there. And I do look at systems all the time that the customer already has bought and is not aware that they have this functionality that they are doing outside the system. Bank recs is classic. We might have automated bank reconciliations, but it just takes a few steps of setup that they never did. So there's all kinds of pieces like that in a sophisticated ERP or accounting system that were just not completed. And so we can, look at that and save a bunch.
And then just to add on to that real quick, sorry, Nicole, but what I've seen also is when you have HR people, maybe you have someone who implemented the system, then left the company, and then you have a new person come in, they just were never trained, like Nicole said, never, they just don't know what the system does. They had the very baseline ability to use the system. Obviously they don't know what they don't know, but that I see that a lot as well. People just don't understand what they're in or how to use it.
So actually I wanted to hit on that point for a moment, because can you both speak to, because both of our firms come in as a consultant, right, to triage, so to speak, and figure out, and we come in at different stages, right? And part of that is sometimes on our side of the house, we see a bad implementation. And so really it's unwinding what was just not a solid implementation. And so, but if you're not accustomed and or don't know that how the system is supposed to function, really you wouldn't even know that it's the root cause of setup that's the issue, right? So can you speak to how often, what stakeholders need to be brought in to sort of look at to really assess the root cause versus the symptoms that we're feeling? And is that our firm? Is that right internal teams? Where should you start? What does that look like? To address the we don't know what we don't know part of the equation. And Tom, I'll start with you if you can speak to that, how you guys handle that on your side.
Oh, thanks. It tends to be a very collaborative process. So it isn't as if we can look at a customer system and say, aha, this is what you're missing, or this is what was done wrong. Because if we don't know what their actual requirements are, then we can't really address whether they're meeting them. Some things are obvious. You know, we've come into companies, and I've worked in installed, you know, big scale ERPs before I got into to the intact practice. But you come in and the dimensions or the chart field or segments, they call them chart fields in PeopleSoft, and I worked in that for years, so it still pops out. They just didn't choose the right definitions between the different segments. So it makes reporting very difficult. Either there's redundancy between two, and then when you get a mismatch, it doesn't fit anywhere in the reporting, or they're just incomplete or just not utilized correctly. And that can be a real challenge retroactively to go back and fix. So, you know, ideally, if we're coming in at the early stage, we can help correct that before it becomes a history problem in accounting. I think that was the answer to the question.
Well played, well played. Justin, how about on your side?
I definitely agree with Tom. There's definitely a collaborative nature to what I do, especially with HRIS systems. You know, we do a HRIS assessment, and it's working with the client and understanding their current state, future needs, what they do know, how they're currently just doing normal functions in a system. So without that knowledge, it'd be really hard for me to kind of gauge and understand where the client potentially, or you know, subject or an HR person or subject matter expert is at in their kind of experience. So once you kind of understand the client or the person a little more, you can kind of understand their needs a little more. But I would say most times in HR, because of how HR has been the last, you know, probably up until COVID, probably just pre-COVID, the lack of technology and use of technology and the fear of technology, it's been a very manual process for HR. The technology shift has definitely happened in the last few years, and that's where we're going. So it's I don't want to say all the time, but more often than not, the person in charge of HR is a technology deficient in some way. So there's always a delta there of ability and skill set. So it's just kind of a common theme that I've noticed the last few years doing what I'm doing is just that. So in a nutshell, just kind of getting in the systems and work in the systems, and you have to have a want and ability to learn a system, to understand the system. If you don't want to touch it, you don't want to mess with it, you just want to do what you do, you're never going to learn a system better than that. And that's typically what we use E2. I know I do payroll, that's what I do. I'm not doing it, I'm focused there, and that's where the focus lies.
Yeah, and I think we can all agree that what we've seen is when there's a limitation in the understanding of the system, or maybe a delta in the training, that what we see is then build workarounds to the
all
system.
The manual processes.
Yeah, and even as it impacts, and part of that is looking at not just the system itself, but are we optimizing the system in the manner in which it's meant to be optimized? So yep. I think we see that a lot, and a lot of that has been the implementation impact. So sure. Before we move to the next slide, one last question. How often should you assess your systems? What would be a best practice in terms of standard cadence? Because it's a solid investment, right? So
big investment.
The implementation fees, the capacity, the time, the productivity impact, it's a solid investment to switch systems. And I think that's part of the inhibition to even make the call. It's not just that price point, it's all the cascading expenses that happen. And so how often would you say somebody should even look at assessing the system?
Tom, you want to go first? Want me to go first?
Yeah.
I have a lot to say on this.
Oh, good. Because I'm just thinking in terms of what people actually come to us with, it's either they waited a long time until they've been suffering for years, and then they assess whether they need a system, or in the current cloud technology environment, systems are changing perpetually. And so although your core general ledger and core financial stuff might stay the same, you might be swapping in additional helper applications out of the marketplace that serve a specific function very well. But 2 years later, something trumps it with much better technology and AI assistance and something like that. So it's both both what I would say is annually and perpetually, because you have to be keeping an eye on the horizon and what's coming out and what's sunsetting too.
Yep. I would say 100% agree with that. Most of our clients have been suffering for years, and now they've kind of broken somehow. The system's broken, or they've just broken themselves and can't deal with it. So now they're raising their hand. But really, my answer was going to be probably always. They should always be thinking about it, looking at it. We have a saying, me and Nicole kind of say all the time: is systems garbage in, garbage out. So if your system has garbage information, there's going to be garbage reporting, garbage just items coming out of it. So at some point, your system becomes worthless. The investment, the time, the energy, the money, everything about it becomes not worth it anymore. So really, a person in the HRS world should be a subject matter expert in their company. There should be a subject matter expert that is always cleaning data, always double checking systems, workflows, and other items that go into a system, because once one thing becomes bad, it has a cascade effect down of items. So my answer is kind of always, but always future, look, current state.
Okay, thank you for that. So we'll move to the next slide. Okay, so now we've assessed that maybe the current system is not the right system. And now if you move into the phase of sort of choosing the right system, and I know this is a fully loaded question and we could probably spend 4 hours just on the first bullet point, but at a very high level, the essential criteria for selecting a system that fits your unique business. Can you just talk about some of the key elements to sort of be thoughtful for when you're choosing the right system? I know, Tom, you talked a lot about output. I think that would probably be where we start, right? But not necessarily in a granular form, but just sort of high level. Can you speak a little bit deeper dive into the types of outputs we would look for as we're choosing the right system, and where do we even start in that search?
Yeah, so I've talked about financial reporting, which I think is the ultimate product of the accounting system. We really need to get, whether it's a graphical dashboard or standard format reports, we really need to get that output from the system in a way that's coherent and reliable and meets all of our basic auditable standards. But along the way, in order to get to that and to know that it's good and auditable, we have to have approval processes. We have to have a good structure of the accounts and the cost centers and all of that. So in terms of essential criteria, I do like to start from that endpoint of what do the stakeholders need out of the system at the end of all the processes, at the end of the year. But then we have to back into the details of what do the different departments and process centers need to make that happen. And so it's really there I really do rely on a spreadsheet that we work with the client to start with the basic stuff, that essential criteria, but then add in all of the pieces that are unique to their business or processes, and maybe introduce some ideas that they hadn't thought of, because as you said, if all you've been doing is this payroll thing, you probably aren't aware of the other possibilities. So we introduce that, and then we basically make a long list that's by area. And then what we need to do is, because it ends up being like a wish list, right? Then to give it some grading for how important is it really, and weight it that way. And that's where we start from when we start approaching the marketplace and looking for options.
And Justin, what about for you? What are some of the things that you would recommend in terms of essential criteria and or just even a starting point?
For sure. The one thing I'll start off by saying is there's no perfect system. A lot of times people are looking for the perfect system, and it doesn't exist. Every system will tell you they're perfect, but they all have their little quirks. So I think that's one of the first things going into, looking into systems, is understanding that it's not going to be, there's no perfect system. So items I usually, talk about with clients, kind of like Tom said, wants versus needs. What is a need now? What do you have to have? What's a want? What's your current state? What's your future state? Workflows, everything kind of Tom touched, but also too, I think a big piece is integration capabilities, especially towards your accounting side. If you're a company like a nonprofit or something of that nature that has to have certain reporting or cost centering or certain labor tied to certain projects or grants, that's a big piece that's often missed in HRIS systems, and then causes all the manual work outside of it, which me and Tom spoke about earlier, because it's not connected. So I think those are some big ones, and I think kind of the last big one for me, some more criteria is, do you have the talent in place? Kind of like Nicole talked about last segment. Do you have somebody, the time, the talent, the ability to implement a system, to correct it, and to keep it going, in the keep it update and keep it flowing, how it's supposed to going forward. So those are the big ones. Cost is obviously a big one as well. Budgets, what can you afford, what can't you afford? Those are kind of the higher level essential criteria we usually talk about with clients.
So can you speak to also the growth part, right? So I'm at 50 employees or I'm at X amount, we're going to bring on VCs, whatever it might look like. How far do you stretch beyond where you are currently with the anticipation of and if in our crystal ball, this is where we think we'll be in a year or 2 years?
So for me, it's you have definitely systems that are more suited for smaller employee totals, the 0 to 15 to 25 to 30. And then you have that kind of mid-range that are 50 to 75 to 100. And then you have systems that are better just over 100. And that's just nature of what it is. I think for me with clients, it's probably a 1 to 2 year window that I'm kind of projecting them to look forward into, because what you don't want is, you don't want to pay for a big implementation and have all this time and effort and have to change a system out in 2 years because you doubled in size from 25 to 50. So a lot of times we're looking at a 2 year window just to kind of forecast and see what's going on, and then also kind of a little bit of a look back as well to see what they've actually done in the previous year or 2 years, kind of see what that growth looks like. But ultimately, I usually recommend for clients systems that are going to fit their future needs. There's no point of getting a system that you have to change out in a year. It just doesn't make sense financially, time, all that lovely stuff. So we're usually looking at 2+ year window.
What about for you, Tom, on your side?
Yeah, that makes sense to me. A 2 year window sounds about like what we would normally be looking at. And also, when you asked about what, how much do you stretch before you make the leap? And it's a lot of work, and it's not, although the sales people will tell you it's easy, it's a lot of work to move from one accounting system to another. There's no way around it. And so in order for it to make sense for your organization, it has to be less work in total when you get to the end of the year, or the 6 months or whatever your window is of going through that process. It has to be less work than you would have been doing otherwise to keep it going and still get the same results. So I guess you have to be in some pain in order to take the medicine, is what I'm saying.
Yeah. It's definitely not easy, for sure.
I'm actually curious if, because we have representation from the accounting finance side and the people side, what we often see is that the systems, we often make singular decisions around systems, right? So on the HRIS side, we're making that particular decision without necessarily consideration of the impacts on the financials and or the integration from QuickBooks or whatever the integration on the financial side of the house, right, might be. And so can you sort of speak to how those systems not need to speak to one another, but when you're choosing the right system, how to be aware of even system impacts, right, on the back end, and how connected HR and accounting really need to be in order to give each other the right information? Because I know a lot of where you pull your information, even from the payroll side or in any of those, because that's usually people's largest line item budget for the financial reporting comes from that side. And so obviously critical that those two players play nice in the sandbox. And we personally know a few HRIS systems that don't play well in the sandbox with others. And so can you just speak to how critical that back-end connection is and how they might impact one another when we're looking at choosing the right system? And I will start with you, Tom.
Well, I'm going to give you the standard CPA answer which is it depends. So we have.
Are you sure that's not the attorney response too?
My attorney told me to say that.
Okay.
The range of requirements from that integration or interface between HR and finance is really broad. And so I have a lot of clients that seem like, they're pretty big, pretty sophisticated, but they're able to get what they need from HR and finance together through just an upload. Others have a pretty basic general ledger level integration where it's just bringing over the payroll journals and that's that. But as Justin said, there's nonprofits, there's professional service organizations that need a lot more activity back and forth. And that could mean bringing in hours into statistical accounts and applied labor dollars, passing through the hours at a billable rate into an automated billing system or a grants reimbursement system. So there's a wide range, and maybe you need your HR and payroll systems to tell finance how much is accrued in liability for time off or something like that. So there's a very broad range of requirements.
Yep, and from my side, it's a very interconnected relationship between accounting and HR. Not even from the nonprofit statement Tom just said, just overall for the health of your business, having the right GL set up, cost codes, cost centers, deductions, pay codes, just having all that set up correctly. But we said earlier, garbage in, garbage out. If you only have 3 cost centers, but you really have 14 in your company, you're not going to be able to get the accurate reports and have the actual clear picture of your company. So there's a big relationship there. When we do the HRS assessments, we bring accounting in. We definitely have that communication with them about what they want, what they need, the stakeholder of it. And when we're looking at systems, we're looking at integration capabilities of those systems, and that often becomes a need for a company, not a want, is because like we said before, systems don't talk, so they're pulling reports out of payroll, manually doing a spreadsheet, manually putting them together, putting them into QuickBooks or whatever they're putting them into. So a lot of time just spent when we could do, like Tom said, we could get these automated uploads. We could do these file feeds that just streamline these systems. So when I'm doing these projects with clients, this is a big piece of the assessment is the needs and the accounting part of it, because if it's not right, there's a bad relationship between the two, and you're not fixing anything. Like Tom said before, is the ultimate goal of these projects or to these systems is to make your life easier, short-term and long-term. So if you're putting systems in just to put systems in place, but they're not doing anything together, you're not fixing any problems. So the relationship's super important. We try to get as much information as possible. And again, that's another thing, kind of like systems, garbage in, garbage out, making sure we have up-to-date GLs and all that stuff is a very, very important part of the company setup, because company setup is going to be a big piece of your HRIS. And if that's wrong, then as we spoke before, bad implementations, systems break, and you have to redo it, fix it, and it just creates a mess of work later.
Yeah, and then what I hear from both of you is there are some businesses that are more complex than others, and especially as we look at growth strategies and for us, it's moving into multiple states or even going global or any of those things. The complexity, and sometimes even it's the industry, right? They require prevailing wage or different types of payrolls run or certified payrolls, or all of those things sort of add a layered effect to the complexity of the system and the reporting requirements that we need to extract. And on the horizon, for example, once we had 100 employees, well, then we need a whole different set of reporting capabilities. And so it's just it's a constant pivot. I think we're always looking at the external market. But when you go to market, navigating the crowded marketplace of systems and options, everybody sells you the world, as you know, until you get to the implementation part, and then somehow the wheels start to come off the bus a little bit in the implementation phase. I don't know how that happens, but it seems to be a trending theme. So can you speak to how somebody who is entering, because I think that's one of those where you have so many choices, it's really difficult to know where to begin. And so how do you navigate that crowded marketplace of systems? Where do you start? Where would you sort of begin to vet through? That's my first question. My second question to compound would be, and is this a good time to bring in a subject matter expert to help you navigate and, for lack of a better term, interpret what the salespeople are offering, so you on the client side are actually answering the right question?
Yep. I'll hop this one first, Tom. So
I know this is a hot button for Justin.
I love this question.
This is a lot.
In my experience so far, there is definitely a deficit in language and communication between salespeople and HR, implementation and HR, and then at the final step, a client service rep and HR. There's just different languages being spoken. I can tell you 6 million stories about the salesperson told me this. Talking to the salesperson, I never said that. So a lot of misconception there. So this is probably the best time to bring in a subject matter expert who knows multiple systems, who knows the market, who knows the insides and outs. A lot of people just Google things, and it's one of those things I'm like, yeah, but I don't know if you're going to get the technical or the translation, like which Nicole's speaking about in those types of things. Referrals are a good thing too. If you have a friend who's talking in a system, ask them about it. Ask them about the ins and outs. Odds are there probably be a little deficit there in terms of utilization or talking about the system, but just to get some more personal information. But this is probably the best time because we stop. We pump the brakes. We stop things. We are able to to translate. We're able to get more clarification for clients and basically, get them the full answer, not just partial answers, and also to taper down or push back a little bit on the salespeople to get the client what they need, not just a salesperson sell them every single thing, if in the suite, just because that's their job. So that's part of the things we do is we're able to find out or figure out what a client needs, get those things kind of done first, and so they're not fire hose or overwhelmed in implementation process and not oversold. So I think that's kind of the biggest thing. And really the last thing I'll say about kind of this is do your research is really part of the game too. Is things change so much. There's 2,000 systems in the world right now, or in the United States, all do different things. Some will say we do this, this, and this, but they only do parts of it. Some systems are fully owned. Some are, partner out and partner with other companies, and they hide it. And so there's pros and cons with all that. And that's kind of what a subject matter expert would do for you, is be able to explain those pros and cons of what a fully owned system is compared to we call it a bolted on system. Be able to translate languages and costs and and all that stuff. So it's a great time.
Yeah, Tom, how about you?
Yeah, I would say the marketplace is so complicated that even, even for, I think that should be a subject matter expert in the accounting systems. And it's a constant journey to stay on top of this, both the requirements, whether it's compliance requirements or something else, but also the products that are out there in the marketplace. And I've been doing it long enough, you hear certain things that you're like, they didn't say they actually published this product. Is it really theirs or are they white labeling it?
Yep.
I can hear a vendor salesperson gloss over something that's a gap. And because I've
1000%.
heard it so much, right? And it's just where I've spent my time. So and same is true with my team. I'll hear something. I'll be like, what do you guys actually know about this product, but compared to what they're telling me? So we spend our time doing that, and I think there's a lot of folks in both HRIS and accounting systems, ERP systems, that have spent a lot of time listening to these things and sorting through it. And it's as soon as you start, even if it's a small ancillary system, AP automation. Oh my God, there's so many products in AP automation and so many claims. And we spend a lot of time sorting through that and making sense of it and trying to get all these different products on a comparable playing level, right? So we can actually say apples to apples, what are you getting for your money here?
So I actually would like to pause for a moment and take a little bit deeper of a dive into what you both have articulated with respect to effectively the business model, right, and the background of these systems that are being offered. Because I think it's something that most people don't think about in terms of when you're purchasing a system. So we see on the back end from a business model perspective, sort of this partnership model, right, where it's like, oh, we don't actually own any of this. We partner this out. We partner, write 401ks out. We partner the benefits out, and we sort of bolt feature it all together. And then from client facing, though, it seems like it's all one system. But in the back in the house, really from a business model perspective, it's this partnership siloed piece. And so things like partnerships collapse and then they change vendors or right? And so I don't think most people, and or even a system that's fully owned cloud-based, right? But then they close API, or is it an open API source? So can you sort of speak a little bit more in depth on the impact and why the research is so critical to understand that operating model and the background, and then how that impacts client facing, what we might see? I'll start with Tom, if you want to speak to that.
Yeah, you talked about partnerships collapse or something like that. That reminded me of a very dramatic change in the, this was in the installed on-premise ERPs, but PeopleSoft used to have, suddenly I'm spacing the name, the big reporting software, Crystal Reports was embedded in PeopleSoft. It was required to print checks. Yeah. And then SAP bought the parent company of Crystal Reports, and PeopleSoft removed it from all their systems and replaced it with something they quickly came up with. And that was a shock to everybody. So like, how do I print checks? That's important, or used to be. And that kind of thing does happen. And so as partners with an organization like we're partners with Sage, which has its complications because it's a very big company. And so we'll say like, well, this is a product they actually built. This is a product they actually bought, and this is a product they're actually white labeling. We know those distinctions that wouldn't be obvious to the customer in the marketplace. So whatever system, whatever ecosystem you're looking at for accounting, for HRIS, for revenue management, it helps to have somebody who works in the industry and surveys the industry to give feedback on that, because it isn't immediately obvious.
Yeah, yeah, I appreciate that. And I know we have the same consideration. Justin, did you want to speak to that before we go to the next slide?
Yeah, real quick. So there are systems out there that bolt on, partnership with everything, from the technical side, when like everything Tom said about when they make a switch and Nicole said, but also too, if there's a break in the system, somehow one of the partners go down, it just creates chaos because they don't know how to, like, you're called into your rep, they don't know how to fix it because it's not theirs technically, so they have to backdoor it to that company. So delayed responses, delayed fixes, it's a mess. I typically lean towards companies that own everything or built everything. Just makes it an easier thing. But everything Tom says correct. It's hard to kind of catch and realize if you don't know it. It's what we do. So we know all the players, we know kind of what it is, what it isn't. But that's definitely a factor in decision making for systems. Closed APIs and open APIs are definitely a big one as well. That basically just means how well they play with external systems, how well you could integrate with other systems, and an open API makes your life way easier. And those are questions that we ask and we talk about in demos and meetings that a regular person might not know. So all very important.
Yeah, and potentially costly, right? And the other piece of that, and then we'll jump to the next slide, I will say is the other thing we see when there's a partnership model is a lot of finger pointing. Well, I don't own that. That person owns that. Well, I don't own, and so it becomes who owns it?
Yeah, like, we don't know that.
So,
oops.
okay. So if we can jump to the last slide. So for maximizing return on investment, and I think really because it is such a massive investment and we are looking at how do we maximize that part of it. So sort of measuring all of those things. What should you expect from a return on investment? And I realize that's a loaded question, right? Because sometimes value is not just a currency exchange. But then also just thinking through how do you measure and maximize the ROI, so that you are actually, again, based on your output, that being the value that the system provides, what kind of ROI are you looking at in terms of, and sort of what are even the measurables around that? Tom, do you want to go first?
Sure. Well, there's direct measurables, which we love if those, because we're accountants and we can measure them and we can concretely say, well, your accounting staff is costing you this much, and we can estimate that this new system is going to save you. Let's be conservative and say 20%. And then we've got a dollar amount that we can say you're saving this much. Are you actually going to reduce your accounting staff by that much? No, but presumably they're going to be doing something more valuable than whatever automated thing we've replaced, right? So there's that, but there's also, and this is the harder part, is the indirect ROI, because as I said at the outset, our main objective is to get the stakeholders what they need in order to make proper strategic decisions. And those are much harder, obviously, to put a value on, but they're clearly very important. And so we have to find ways to capture that value, which is a lot more theoretical. But in a case of a lot of these systems, that just the efficiency aspect, never mind the effectiveness of the output, the efficiency aspect alone will show you the ROI that you need to justify it, because things have gotten so inefficient.
Agree.
I think you ventured into our world of indirect costs, right? So like productivity is one piece of it. That's a pretty solid measurable. But when we get into even things like, someone's experience, right? The employee experience of systems not frustrating, or we often look at, visibility to work not just in the business, but on the business. And how do you measure visibility, right? It's only through business impact. So again, you're in our land and measuring the indirect. Justin, how about you for maximizing ROI?
Well, for us, for like what kind of return, when we do HRIS assessments, we are measuring time spent on certain aspects of their current function. So like you said, it's an actual number, and then we can put an estimate on what a system do with automation and workflows and file feeds and things like that, and with the reduction of time and energy and money would be spent. So those are the easy ones, and then to kind of piggyback off the unmeasurable ones, We have clients, it ties back into too many systems. You have employees that are onboarding, or regular employees that are spending time in 4, 5, 6, 8, 10 systems, that are spending time, and productivity goes down, and how many logins do you have? And you just want to bang your head on the wall because it's so difficult and tough to change your 401k or whatever it might be. So there's all those indirect measurables that a system will just, and the phrase I like to say to clients, a correctly done system that is correctly suited and assessed for you will change your life. It'll make your life easier in workflows, productivity, employee experience. It just makes your life easier when it's done right. And that's where the subject matter experts come into play, like me and Tom, is we help you set up and do all that lovely stuff and make it correct. But there's all, and the last one I'll say, that there's obviously the measurables too, what you're currently paying for your system, how much you're paying for it. It's one thing we look at as well. What are you currently paying? And more times than not, I can get clients full suites, every bell and whistle of a system from what they're paying, for just payroll for certain companies. Things of that nature are also measurable that we take a look at when we do assessments.
Yeah, and sometimes there's hardware. If you're switching from on-prem systems to cloud, and you can get rid of all the hardware and the staffing or the consultants it takes to maintain all of that, and the security, that there's a whole bunch of savings available there too to figure into that ROI.
And also reduction of systems. There's also savings there as well. Like, if you're getting rid of 3, we're able to get rid of 4 or 5 systems because, our HRS and accounting, there's a ROI savings there as well.
Mm-hmm.
And we see that on the employee record retention side, to your point, so many paper trails, and so just the amount of time to just archive all of those systems, and just the bandwidth and the headspace that it takes, right? And just not to mention the footprint in terms of all the files and all of those things. It is really costly. The other thing too, that I am curious in terms of circling back to implementation, but as it relates to maximizing the return on investment, would you recommend, because often what we'll see is you buy this full suite and you use a third of it, right, and not the other 2/3. And would you recommend a phased approach in terms of systems? So in on the people side of the house, we have the luxury of turning things on in a strategic manner, right? So we know you need payroll, we know you need time and attendance, recruiting and applicant tracking systems might come next, right? So we sort of think through like what makes the most sense to turn them on and when. And part of that is just because people can only handle from a learning curve so many things at one time. So is there any method to that madness? I realize that, again, probably just depends on the client, et cetera, but in terms of maximizing the return on investment and working with customers and clients that sort of need, right, from a budget perspective, to be mindful of, like, as we grow, we'll begin to expand. Is there anything you can speak to on that?
Well, from our we're talking about subscription software. You're usually signing up for 1 year at a time, sometimes a multi-year. And these things are, I think of them as a barbed hook, right? They go in really easy and they don't come out easily. So if you're putting in a new system, starting with your core requirements, especially the things that check off those top priorities that I talked about on our list, and then adding on as you go, you won't be so inclined to pay for either users or applications that you're not using. And if you add something in halfway through the year, you get that prorated to the end of your subscription cycle. So I usually recommend going fairly light at the outset. Get the things where you really need to win. If you're a company that has revenue recognition issues, you need that revenue management now. That's not really so much of an option for you. You need to get that in along with your core. And maybe that even means you have to implement Salesforce at the same time to really make it work, or something like that. But for the most part, that's kind of an exception to my rule of phase it in and add what you need when you need it, or 3 months before you need it.
And like the whole contract thing is a great point. A lot of people don't realize, and there's really good salespeople out there, that they're getting that hook set in them and they're paying for this stuff they might not touch for 6 months. So we definitely try to take what's needed first, payroll, timekeeping, and then it's always easier to add on later than it is to remove, exactly like you said. So that's what we definitely try to do. That's what I do. Doing what I do is, analyzing the client's needs, so getting them what they need, not what the salesperson is telling them what they should have. So definitely playing that, that game of let's get you what you need. You can learn it, become masters of those, and then add on as we kind of phase approach it.
Awesome. Okay. Well, we are at the end of our hour. So to both of you, thank you. Huge thank you. If you had one key takeaway that if you heard nothing else from what we just talked about for an hour, which we at this team could probably talk about for 2 days, but condensed to 1 hour, if you were to say to end of our attendees, something that you would think about, one key takeaway, if you heard nothing else, it would be this. What would that be? Tom, did you want to start? Is that unfair? Do you want to process?
No,
the magic answer.
The magic answer. I think a recurring thing throughout here is, whether you're hiring somebody to be a subject matter expert for you, or if you're just circulating the question among your peers in your industry, but to make sure to gather viewpoints and experience beyond what's in your organization, so that you can correctly or more favorably assess what your needs are and when you need it, and how much you should expect to pay for it, and what kind of value you should expect to get out of it.
And Justin, your last gem of wisdom.
I think I'm gonna say this from the HR side of the coin here. I think it's embrace that technology that's out there. There's things that are out there that will help you do your job better, make your life easier, make your employees' life easier, make your, just all that stuff. It's just out there. Just embrace it and understand what's out there, and always try to always try to learn what's going on and be ahead of the curve, because this is kind of where HR is going. And AI is the next big wave of, we have another conversation on AI and HR, but that's where technology is going. I said, just be open to it and be able to understand what's out there and where it's going.
Yeah, great points. And just surround yourself with the right resources, and so that you can help make informed decisions. And fantastic. Okay, well, thank you to everybody. We really appreciate all the attendees who joined us. Thanks for all the questions that have come throughout. We will send this recording to all of the attendees, and hopefully we will see everybody soon. Thanks for having us. Bye, guys.
Bye.